Welcome back, folks, to another episode of the Yankees Farm Report. We've got several topics to touch on, and now the spring training is winding down. We have more video and more data. But before we begin, as always, I want to thank the channel members for helping keep the lights on. You're much appreciated. To everyone else that watches this content, that shares and comments, thank you. Thank you very much for helping the channel grow. That said, I also want to bring up that the Yankees Farm website, YankeesFarmReport.com, is now also up. Make sure you guys visit it, create an account if you want to join the forums and join the discussions there to create posts and just be active. Make sure you sign up. There's also going to be a newsletter. If you also want to receive updates via email, make sure you go ahead and sign up to that. It's on the main page. Um, if you're Yankee fans and love prospects, you can write. You want to contribute something, to shoot me a DM, and we'll talk about the possibility of you writing something up for the site. If you want to donate, keep the website up and running, and would like to contribute, I ask that you become a member of the channel, which goes towards keeping the site open as well as other subs for the content you see created. Getting right into it, I just want to briefly touch on injury updates. If you didn't know, Brock Selvage's season is already over. That's unfortunate. I was hoping to see, or thinking that he was going to have a big season, especially from what we saw in his spring training debut. I think the fastball was up to 97 miles an hour, and the velo looked like it was back. So I was hoping for a really good season from Brock. Sabio Marte is throwing live VP, should be ready for opening day. Luis Velasquez is throwing and is expected to come off the IL in May. I don't know if you guys wanted to touch on any of those.
Pearson is back too, from what I understand, right? Because I
Uh,
saw him, like I sent you the picture of him and Xavier Marte in Tampa.
who was that?
I'm guessing Jerson Alejandro should be back to
Oh,
throwing, I
yes.
would
Okay.
imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he should be back as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just, going to Brock Selvage, it's always sucks to lose a guy who, while his prospect status had fallen off a little bit over the last, 12 to 18 months, still got a lot of talent. His slider and fastball combination, especially, had the chance to be MLB potential. And it's really with pitchers, it seems like some of these guys, just one injury can spiral into a ton. We've kind of seen it with Lalane. Obviously, Hampton's had 2 years missed now, and unfortunately, Selvage. This is basically second major injury in 3 seasons, and when he was healthy, he definitely seemed not himself. So. I don't want to write the kid out. He's still, I don't, maybe just 24, if I remember correctly, if
He's
even
younger than that.
24 yet. Um, but that path to being at least an MLB starter has probably got a lot more challenging. So, I would hope him a quick recovery. It's elbow as opposed to shoulder, which is, better, even though it sounds just as bad. So, hopefully he's able to rebound and next year he can kind of get himself back on the map. But it's going to be hard for him, in my mind, to get back into that top potentially 10 status that he, once was close to achieving.
Yeah, definitely wishing for him a speedy recovery, and hopefully we get to see him on the mound soon. Henry Lalane is also throwing live BP. Not sure if he'll get into a game, but he is throwing. The fastball is back up to 95, so the velo is picking up, which is something you definitely want to see for Lalane. I had high hopes for him. I know injuries have derailed him for the last 2 seasons. Hoping he can get back on the horse this season, being 100% healthy.
Yeah, and when I was talking to Tim Naring the other day off the record, he and a lot of the other people inside the Yankees organization are really expecting a huge year out of him, like what you and I were talking about
Mhm.
right after the conversation. So I'm really excited to see what he has. It kind of almost sounds like they're expecting him to finish in Double A if all things go well.
Mhm.
So that could be big.
So for people that don't aren't too familiar with Lalane, except for the couple clips they've seen of him, what kind of almost on the same plane of what Laronge is doing right now is what I was expecting of Lalane. Unfortunately, like I said, injuries derailed him. They've set him back, but I mean, he looked that good at the lower levels.
I think,
He was,
the main difference to me is while they both definitely had injuries kind of holding them back, Lagrange, it was never the arm and the
No.
shoulder. And that's what
Well,
Lalane's
yeah,
issue has
Lagrange's injury was a
been.
lower back injury.
Exactly, yeah. And, just when you start dealing with the shoulder, I mean, this kind of I was alluding to earlier with the Selvage's elbow, but basically every pitcher gets an elbow injury at some point, with whether it's Tommy John or internal brace now, or everyone comes, but the success rate coming back from that, it's probably at least being able to pitch again, effective, somewhat, where you were, probably in the 90th percentile, but the shoulder is just much more devastating, it seems like, and a lot harder to bounce back from. So I think that's the thing that gives me more pause with Lalane, where, I still want to believe, from my top 10, from my top 30 prospect rankings, I want to say I had him 14th, 13th. I still, rate him higher just because I know that potential is there, but it's just, will we ever see the Lalane that dominated in the FCL a couple years ago? I'm not sure. The biggest thing though is we're going to see him in April, which we never have before, and that makes me very happy. It's good that he's had a fully healthy offseason.
Yeah, agreed there. Definitely trending upwards. Want to move into our next topic, which is the players that we've seen at camp. I want to start right off the bat with, I mean, the guy who's generating the most buzz, which is Carlos Laronge. 3 games, he's pitching to a 0.93 ERA, 9 and 2/3 innings, 3 walks, 9 strikeouts. He's keeping the walks down. Hitters are hitting 125 against him. I mean, every time Laronge takes the mound, during spring training, you see him all over social media.
Yeah, and it's fun being in the camera wells when there's photographers that don't follow the Yankees. Like they'll know Garrett Cole and like the bigger names, Aaron Judge, that kind of thing. But you get a kid that goes to pitch and they're like, who the heck is this guy? And why is he throwing 103?
Mhm.
And I'm like, yeah, that's Carlos Laronge. I've been following him for, it's gonna be my 4th year following him. I've kind of been covering his story for a while, and it's been fun watching him move up through the ranks. And this has kind of been his thing, and all of a sudden he's on everybody's radar because he's been doing this in spring training, and it's been legit stuff. He'll go 102-mile-an-hour fastball, and then the next pitch is an 85-mile-an-hour slider, and the batters don't know what to do with it. And it's just so much fun to watch. That kind of velo change is insane.
Yeah, I think the most fun part for me has just been seeing all the people, just Yankee fans, not or just baseball fans, just taking those TJ Stats cards and just seeing all those absurd stuff numbers he puts up because it's unreal just how good his stuff is. I was talking with um, some other Yankee fans on online today, and we're talking about Yavani Cruz, who's had a really nice, he's had a really nice spring showing velocity. And they're asking, what makes Carlos's stuff play up? They both throw 100. Well, obviously Carlos goes a little above 100, but it's just how good the shapes are. The fastball has nearly 18 miles of inverted break, so it's staying with a lot of ride. The slider has just so much horizontal, has a really nice horizontal cut to it. The sweeper obviously gets very wide, and he's getting guys to chase on it. It's just the entire repertoire. He has 4 pitches that when they're even not even 75% on, they're still probably 70 great pitches, 65 great pitches. So it's been awesome to see that praise come towards him. The issue, I don't want to say issue, the main area that he needs to continue improving on is still going to be that control, throwing more strikes for, with his fastball in the zone, as well as getting his misses into the shadow of the zone rather than being complete, forward balls. Um, but it's been really encouraging. It's great seeing him get so much attention. It's kind of becoming clear to the league that we have something special.
Yeah, for somebody who's been watching like on him for over 4 years, man, I'm really happy for the guy. I see a lot of people who've written articles and talking about overnight success or where did this guy come from out of nowhere? I'm like, he didn't come out of nowhere. He's been working at this shit for like 4+ years, and the way he's pitching right now was not the way he was pitching three years ago, not even 2 years ago. Something completely changed with him. I want to say after the injury. He went to the Arizona Fall League. I want to say in 24, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that sounds
this
right.
was going
Yeah, it was
into the
so it was
25 season,
24.
so switch.
While the ERA was nice, the walk rate was crazy. The walk rate was crazy. And again, he was coming off of the back injury. That could have been one of the reasons why the command was, that off. Like he's not gonna be, he's not a guy that makes excuses. He'll just tell you, hey, I had a bad day, I had a bad night, or I wasn't on. So I love the progression that we've seen from him, and you know, kudos to the Yankees development team for getting him to where he is today, and kudos to him for putting in the work.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big story. I remember is after the Arizona Fall League, he texted coaches, "Hey, give me 2 weeks to, rest a little bit, and then I'm gonna pay for myself to live in Tampa, and I want to be at the training center every day, working on my pitch shapes, working on my, my body, working on his delivery, and it clearly paid off last year. He was tremendous. Made himself a, consensus top 100 pick. So I think that really, obviously Yankees player development gets a lot of praise, but yeah, he deserves a lot of praise himself to take that initiative.
Mhm.
I think if you're in the minor leagues, and especially if you get to the higher minor level of the minor leagues, you have a certain level of, your hardworking, traits, but he's showing, excuse me, a few levels above that to show that commitment. It's kind of been a talking point in the spring. It's cool to see people recognize, his work ethic because I think that's something that no matter what level you're at or what your skills are, if you have a good work ethic,
That reminds
you
me
can
of
achieve
that
a lot.
time. That reminds me of the time early on when he was at Somerset. I want to say it's the second game. And I want to say they were playing against Binghamton, and they ran wild on him. They ran wild on him. I think they stole like 8 bases, 9 bases, something like that. And he went to coaching staff and he said, "Hey, this is something I need to work on. Give me a week or something like that." And his next outing, that didn't happen anymore. I think he came back with like a slide step now, or he threw his timing off of a little bit. But guys were no longer running on him like they were in that second game.
It's kind of fun to watch, like the difference between Laronge and say like a Cade Winquest, who also was getting a lot of buzz coming into spring training, and nobody's really talking about Winquest, especially with how poor he's been looking. And he like when I was watching the Rays this afternoon, he didn't look great against the Rays either. His control wasn't there. Um, it's just a lot of fun to see someone that they've built, so to speak, internally and really picked up on the cheap because I think he was signed for only 10K, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
And Winquest, I don't even know if he's going to make the major league roster with the way that he's been going. I honestly think that he's going to get sent back to the Cardinals.
Yeah, I think that's the consensus on that. Aaron, and I had this conversation with you. I said that Winquist reminds you a lot of like Justin Lang, a guy who has talent,
I definitely
but
think calling him to laying is pretty unfair. I definitely agree. Wingquest has not looked good this spring. I would definitely not say he's nearly as wild as laying, and but
no, I didn't
that
mean it. I didn't
it's
mean it in
true
terms of
though.
that. I mean
He
like
needed
he
to
has the
del
ability, but just for some reason he's not able to put it together.
if we were in a position where we could send Wingquest down to the minors, I'd be content. I really like some of the stuff that he has, getting that fastball up. Um, Maybe he has a good oh god, is a splitter or curve? It's flicking my mind, but yeah, it's just he hasn't delivered what you need to give him a major league spot. That's the risk of taking a Rule 5 pick. And it's just yeah, it's if he has to get sent back to St. Louis, he has to get sent back. But I like that they took a shot.
Mhm.
That's kind of it's a lottery ticket right there.
But I feel like what he's giving them right now, I'm more excited about like Giovanni Cruz.
Yeah. Yeah. And Giovanni Cruz hasn't really been generating a whole ton of buzz. He's been kind of flying under
He's
the
only been
radar,
in
so
two
to speak.
games. He was in what 3 days ago, and I think he went yesterday or was it today? I can't remember,
I don't
but
remember if it was today.
but I know I've seen
I
him in
didn't
two
finish
games.
watching the game. But even when he's done like BPs and stuff like that, like normally there's a little bit of buzz with the
Mhm.
reporters, kind of talking about, oh, hey, this guy looks pretty good. Kind of like after Cole threw, and I was at one of Rodon's like BPs last week, And like even Rodon was just, it was just me and one other reporter. Nobody really went to go look because it's Rodon. Everybody knows what to expect out of him. But there's sometimes like you'll get like I was at Ben Hess and Dylan Coleman through a live BP. That was the only one there because nobody wanted. I don't understand it. Someone, especially someone as high profile as Ben Hess, but nobody's really been talking about the prospects other than Elmer and Laronge.
Well, just piggyback off that real quick. I'm surprised we haven't seen any from Bryce Cunningham. Have you seen him out there?
I've been thinking the same thing. I have not seen even on the minor league additional player roster. He hasn't been added to that either, which has been partly concerning because if Hess is thrown in a game, usually they're in the same kind of conversation.
Yes.
From what I've seen, right? I mean, usually when you talk about Ben Hess, you're going to talk about Cunningham because they went in the same
Yeah, one and
draft
two.
year.
They were 1 and 2.
So the fact that I haven't seen any of Cunningham, I'm wondering if he's a little behind this year. I haven't made my way out to minor league camp yet, so I don't know what the roster looks like or any of that kind of thing. Um, I'm part of me is concerned though.
I will say, I know we're going to talk about it more later, but he was on the spring breakout roster.
Yeah,
So, I don't think they put him on that if he's
Yeah, but that's
really on the
that's the
shelf.
preliminary roster. That doesn't really matter. I went to the spring breakout game last year, and then there were guys that were not even on the roster were on the field that day.
yeah. It says
Yeah,
final
I'm not
roster
saying he's
subject to
going to
change.
pitch, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if he's put on that roster to begin with, if he's, out for if he's not going to be even close to ready for opening
If,
day.
if
So
if I've never said it before, I really hate the way that minor league baseball does not report on player injuries. Because I remember last year Cunningham disappeared for like 7 weeks, and he was never put on the IL.
Yeah, it's been
Yeah,
very frustrating, and like
that's
I've
no
talked
that's the
to
norm.
Tarpon's front office staff, and they're like, "You know more than I do." Like they don't even tell me who's injured, which is kind of hilarious considering it's the GM. But you know,
Mm. All right, moving to the next guy, we're going to look at Spencer Jones. He's hitting 333, 1346 OPS, six extra base hits, four home runs, 3 for 3 on steals. The walk rate is a nice 14%, a little slightly over 14%. The K rate is exactly where you want to see it, especially for Yankee fans who've been chirping the loudest about this. It's a little over 28%.
he's been fascinating to watch because I've watched a lot of him take BP in the cage because that's where you can really look at the mechanics, for the power, right? And I mean, it's the most awkward baby deer just born kind of a stance at the plate.
Mhm.
But I tell you what, I'm not going to knock it because boy, that works.
Yeah, I'm sure it's fun to
Like
watch. I'm sure it's fun to
it's
watch them in BP.
the power is so much fun to watch, but
Mhm.
just kind of watching him in a game. I mean, obviously, I've seen him hit a home run in a game, but just kind of watching his approach in the game, and he's become a lot more disciplined at the plate than he had been before. Um, I would like to see him flatten the swing out just a teeny little bit, just to get more of those line drives, like an Aaron Judge kind of a swing. Because now it looks kind of scoopy,
Mhm.
where it's he's looking for the power, and I don't know if the Yankees necessarily want that. I don't know.
One thing that I have noticed, I've noticed that and I know it's early. He went through several batting stances last year, but he seemed to have dropped the leg kick and now doing like a toe tap.
Yeah, it's a leg raised toe tap kind of
Yeah,
a thing where he's putting all the power in his back leg. Is
yeah.
kind of
So
what it
he
looks like.
he seems to be he might be he might be better balanced now that he's dropped the leg kick.
It looks like a mix between like I agree with the Otani comp. It's kind of a mix between Otani and Judge.
Mm.
And the Judge mechanics obviously work because he's lefty Judge essentially, and Otani works because he's a lefty. So like I get the blend between the two of them. It's just the stance when he's at the plate waiting for the pitch to come in just looks so awkward because he's his butt sticking out and then he's hunched over the plate and I mean
I mean, like I said, it's a work in progress
whatever
because last
works.
year he changed his batting
Yeah,
stance. I would say like 4 or 5 times.
yeah. So they're definitely working on something, and he was working with was I don't know if a teacher man, I don't know who he works with
No, it wasn't with
off
Teacher
season.
Man. I don't think. No, it wasn't with Teacher Man.
I mean, I can't get too critical about how a guy looks at the plate. Craig Counsell had his hands way above his head, and he had a very successful career. I liked how he's obviously trying to respond to some of the issues he's had. Not that I care too heavily about spring training stats and think it's indicative of what will happen, but he's chasing a little less right now. Only, he's above average in chase percentage in spring training. His zone contact is 81%, which is 37th percentile, but 81% is a lot better than like I think it was like 64 last year. And yeah, he's striking out a little less, walking more. Yeah, and Brophy said it. His approach has changed. He's not been chasing as much, which is good. I think his thing with chasing is he does damage on pitches that are balls. So he's kind of in a weird case where it's you're okay with him expanding a little bit, but there's probably some pitches where he's over expanding on that, like are those two balls off the plate that he shouldn't be going for. So it's definitely, you can see little bits here and there, but I'm mainly reserving my judgment for, for the season going forward. I will say, I've seen Bobby Malone's, I know they've been one driving it. He's saying, if he has a K percent under 30%, he's gonna take off. And well, that would be great. I'm not even thinking he needs to be that hot, that low. I think, getting it down to 32 would be cool, but I'm more just focused on that zone contact rate. If he's able to start making more damage in the zone and around that 70% mark, and if he is able to walk a little bit more, that those are the areas I'm looking for, not just truly K percent, because I think, that if those things are happening, that strikeout rate will just naturally deflate a little bit.
Yeah, if he's making more contact, I definitely see him making more, doing more damage. We won't worry so much about the K rate. I've been saying for a while, as long as he can get it close to 30%, just over it, that 30 to 32% range, that's probably where he's going to be at, hopefully, in best case scenario.
Yeah,
Um,
he's definitely a unicorn.
Moving on, Elmer Rodriguez, 3.0, 3 ERA, 6 innings of work, one walk, five strikeouts. In the WBC, 6 innings of work, five walks, five strikeouts. I mean, to me, he's looked, as I've been saying for a while now, like the most polished prospect in the system and the most MLB ready.
Curious if he goes tomorrow behind Garrett Cole, because if Cole's only going one inning, they're going to need a starter that's going to give you some time, eat some innings up. And I'm thinking because they haven't had Elmer pitch since he's been back from the WBC. I don't believe they have, anyways.
I thought he was going to go
So
today.
I don't know if did he go today. I'm going to look real
I
quick.
didn't see. No, but I thought I saw he was going to go today.
My I don't want to, I guess maybe you can call it a concern is, I think the differences between Lagrange and Elmer are well documented. I think Elmer, for what he lacks in elite stuff, he makes up for with, a very wide, kitchen sink of pitch
Six
types.
pitch repertoire.
Um, but the one thing I do think he needs to improve on, and it's the same thing as Lagrange, but I think he needs to work on being in the zone more. For as much as I like Elmer, I think that he is not able to generate the same amount of swing and miss as Lagrange is. And while he can get a lot of soft contact, I think, with his fastballs, a sinker and four seamer, he needs to get those more in the zone where it gets, it keeps those hitters honest. Yeah, like I said, if he's a guy who can't overpower you, so there's a little bit of work to do with a guy who it's kind of like Max Fried. When Max Fried is hitting his fastballs on the edges of the zone, it just makes the rest of his repertoire play up so much. And I just think that's the next step in Elmer's evolution. Being having to be a more control based guy because he doesn't have the A tier stuff. But that's fine. He's the same. He's 20, I guess about to turn 23 years old if he hasn't already. So, it's been good to see him hold his own as a starter for the Yankees this spring and, perform well for Puerto Rico. And it's awesome that he got to represent his country at such a young age. But, I'm excited to see what happens over the next few months because I'm expecting him to play a role for the Yankees at some point in 2026.
Yeah, he's definitely gonna be the first man up. Next guy up is Ben Hess. He's pitched 2 games, 1.80 ERA, 5 innings of work, 3 hits, 2 walks, 6 strikeouts. Hitters are hitting 176 against him.
You look really good. That was one of the guys that I was talking to Nearing about, and he's just kind of blown away by what they've gotten out of Hess and another fellow first rounder Lombard, which I'm guessing you'll talk about later. But Hess has been very impressive. Just I can't look at the X axis when I'm in the camera wells. I can only look at Y axis and kind of Z, I guess, if you want to go that route. So just kind of looking at pitch shapes from kind of an off angle from either third or first base. I'm very impressed with what I've seen. I've seen both in game and I've seen live BP, and I mean there's nothing to really knock. It's I don't know. I'm sure Aaron has more data than just kind of the eye test that I got.
Yeah, I mean, with what I see is just, his curveball truly looks like a plus offering. It's been getting a lot, a lot of swing and miss in in his limited appearances so far. But I mean, that just, that's good continuation of what we saw at Hudson Valley and Somerset this year. It's a real weapon for him. His sweeper is still a really solid looking pitch. And, even as is, because he gets good extension, he has good pitch shapes. He's a guy who is a real threat to be, middle of the rotation starter. But, looking at his velocities this spring, his fastball is averaging a shade under 94, which is pretty similar to what, I believe in last year it was around 94, 95 on average. His sweeper and curveball are both sub 80 miles an hour, which at least for the curveball makes sense. But, I'm just wondering if he's unable to unlock a little bit of a velocity bump, what that could do for him. I'm just, I don't think anyone is. I think Cam Schlittler is very much the exception to the rule, but he's still younger than Cam Schlittler was when he went from throwing barely over 90 to throwing 99 in the span of a year. I'm not saying Ben Hess needs to add, nearly 10 miles per hour to his fastball, but I would love to see him get another tick or two. I think that would just make, especially the four seamer, and the sweeper go from, above average pitches to, potentially plus. I think the fastball for sure would become a plus pitch to go with that curveball. So, it's a good start. He's, I think, a guy will definitely get talked about a lot more. He's been overshadowed by Carlos and Elmer, but, it's just, and, another success story in the Yankees farm system, pitching development.
Yeah, one thing I was gonna say about Ben, I was like, remember him coming out of the draft. If I recall correctly, his numbers did not look pretty. I don't think any besides maybe Blake Gillespie's numbers, um, caught your eye, and the Yankees were like, "We don't care about that. We don't care
Listen,
about that."
it's
Yeah.
totally fair. Watching college baseball, it's already an offensive league. Um, unless you're Paul Skeens, pitchers, you typically, a 3 ERA is pretty amazing. But yeah, no, he just clearly had issues at Alabama, but they used those, to drive his price. That's why he went for, less than Bryce Cunningham because they took him under slot, but they knew that this guy has a lot of the goods are there. It's just we can help bring the stuff out more consistently than Alabama could, which is, I would hope is true for every MLB team. I think there's probably a couple of them still that that's arguable, but yeah, it was taking a bet that we can get the best out of this stuff and help him reshape his pitches and reshape his body. And I know there's been reports that he's picked up a lot of muscle and lost some of that fat that he had at Bama. And yeah, he just looks, I'm excited to see him in his second full season and see what his, body looks like as he goes through it.
Yeah, and I think that's the exciting part about Xavier Rivas as an example because they took him way beyond underslot because he was supposed to go top 5 rounds. from what I understand, and he went I think 14th. Because he was coming back from Tommy John, and you don't know what you're going to get in a pitcher that's coming back from Tommy John. But he was there. He was the Ole Miss ace at the time when he was there. So um, he, although he's a little bit behind where Hess is because he hasn't gotten up to Double A yet. Um, I think he's going to be on par with what Hess potential can be, I guess.
Moving on to the next guy is Harrison Cohen. Pitched one game, 2 innings, 2 strikeouts at WBC. He had a very impressive debut. 1 game, 2 innings, 5 strikeouts. Very impressive night for him. Last year, if I'm not mistaken, was arguably probably the Yankees' best relief pitcher in the system statistically. I thought last year, by the time he got to Scranton, that he probably was MLB ready, or to at least make his debut. For me, he should definitely be making his debut this season.
Yeah, and he's looked. I mean, like you were saying, he looks MLB ready. There was a lot of buzz around him before he went to go pitch for Israel in Miami, and then I just saw him Saturday against the Phillies. So I'm excited to see him throw. Hopefully tomorrow. Um, they have a couple back to back games going this week at home. I think it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They have back to back home games with the split squad on Thursday. So I'm guessing they'll get him in one of those 3 games. Um, but yeah, like he just the control is there. I see a lot of whiffs on the pitches that he's throwing, and with the uncertainty with the bullpen going on right now, and I don't think he's been reassigned to minor league camp. I'm
No.
kind of curious if he has a shot to make the major league roster for opening day.
Yeah, I mean, the most it always amazes me with Cohen is, he does not have good velocity. Yeah, especially, with the fastball, it's not even 93 miles an hour, but he just has such outstanding shapes for what he does throw, and he gets so much swing and miss. It's really counterintuitive to how I think, but he's just that cutter, which I think is kind of almost like a slider, but it's just such a nasty delivery, and he gets so many whiffs on it. It's he's a guy who we kind of go back to the Cade Winquist conversation, but you think about the kind of dart dart throws the Yankees kind of took for this last rotation or last bullpen spot. Shavit and Winquist haven't been good. I think Hedrick's been really the standout, and he'll probably make the roster. But your Donnie Cruz still has some work to do. I think Cohen's putting himself in a position where, when inevitably someone has to go down or someone gets hurt in the MLB team, I expect Cohen to get a shot at some point. I think, I know they'll have to find a 40-man spot for him, but if he's able to be a little bit more consistent than he was this past year in Scranton, then it's going to be do or die time. You got to see what you have with him. I think we'll definitely find out for sure what they're through their actions this season.
And his pitches remind me in a way of Nestor Cortez, just because of the lower velo that he has. Because Cortez, if I remember correctly, doesn't have that kind of overpowering velo, but he leans a lot on his off speed as well.
Wanted to touch a little bit about George Lombard. I know the batting average I think is 185. What I have liked that I've seen from him is the power. Power seems to be coming in. Defense is major league ready. I don't think there's any argument there. Defensively, he's at that level. It's just something that we've said here before is just the bat needs to catch up.
Yeah, and the Yankees internally like the plate discipline that Lombard's been putting at the plate, even though he hasn't. Like you said, the numbers aren't there. But just kind of looking at the eye test, looking at the pitches that he's taking, the ones that he's swinging at, they really like the way that his mind works at the plate, and you just kind of put those 2 things together. I think the bat is major league ready. I mean, the way that I look at it is, hey, look, if they had Volpe the way that he is as an opening day guy a couple of years ago, I think Lombard's a little bit above where Volpe was. Now that being said, I don't want them to push Lombard. I want him to be ready. I want him to be fully baked, ready to go. September call up. Worst case scenario if Volpe doesn't work out. With after that recovery.
Yeah, my thing, and this was kind of my main talking point when I wrote about him in my top 30. We've all seen the plays. The glove is amazing. He's a pro ready shortstop, but and not that like I said with Spencer Jones, I'm not, taking this spring data, to correlate to what he has or hasn't worked on, what is going to happen this season. But, the biggest issue was he just does not swing enough. He's not aggressive enough in the zone. And when he does swing, he, does miss too much in the zone. And that's, gonna cap his offensive upside. He's been hitting the ball hard. At 108.5, 90th percentile max or 90th percentile exit velocity is really good. I mean, he's still, not even 21 years old. His frame is built nicely. I like the adjustment of his hands and his swing. I think it should help him get to the ball quicker. Um, I'm not exactly sure what the bat speed is, but hopefully that will help him make more zone contact. But, it's just he hasn't done it in the spring, and we gotta see how he handles it in the, in the, as we get to the season. I think the player he is now is he's a guy who's going to provide you good defense and he'll get on base because he'll walk. But that's a good for a nine hitter. But he can be so much more than that if he can just start making contact more. And I think part of that is also just swinging more, um, and just being a bit more aggressive and taking and not just taking. He's just too passive. That's it for me. I really want to see him be more. I'm trying to think the right way to frame this, but because I don't want him swinging at pitches out of the zone, but I
Become
think
a
with
little more
Brendan Jones is
aggressive.
my best example of this because I remember Brendan Jones was super selective and he didn't wasn't really hitting for power in Hudson Valley, and then he got to Somerset and he was swinging. He had a little bit of a higher swinging strike rate, but he was hitting. He hit like 7 home runs in like 40 something days or something like that, and it's okay to swing and miss a little bit more if you're just not just taking pitches right down the middle, and that's what I want to see from George Lombard.
Next up, Kyle Carr is pitching to a 2.25 ERA, 4 innings of work, 4 strikeouts, 2 walks. Hitters are hitting 0.077 against him.
Yeah, he's been really impressive as well. There was, I think his last outing was a night game. I think it was against the Blue Jays.
It was a couple of days
So
ago.
yeah,
Mhm.
I was surprised that they left him out for as long as they did. Kind of like Laronge's last relief outing was like 3 innings, 4 innings, something like that. But Carr was out there for I think two and a third, something like that, and he put up pretty decent numbers in that outing. And um, I don't think he had any fly balls. I think everything was either strikeout or ground ball as far as outs go. And that's the kind of thing that I love to see. Nothing got past the infield.
Yeah, I think one of the thing changes that he made when he got hot during the summer was he had adapted a cutter, and it was that really helped him out because his fastball does not have good velocity, and he just wasn't in the zone enough. But when he started throwing that cutter and he changed a couple other things, it really just blossomed him. And just looking at the spring stats, his cutter and sweeper grade out about average, a little above average to above average. But it's very small sample size. It's just 12 cutters, but he's thrown it in the zone, 58.3% of the time, which is pretty good for this point. So it's if he can have that pitch not just be a reliable strike throwing pitch, but a pitch that you can generate weak contact on, if not get whiffs on, that's just gonna vault him up. Now, that does bring me the worry where I still want to see more than two good pitches. I think if you're going to be, I think that's what we're seeing with Luis Heel right now is where you only have three pitches. That doesn't really do it to be a starter in the MLB anymore. Not that that cutter sweeper combo couldn't make Kyle Carr a good reliever. I think it could, but I still want to talk about him as a starter because that's how the Yankees view him at the moment. And I think that's the only way to fairly view him until he's proven he can't. And that's going to be the can you make a step up with that changeup this year, or add a sinker, or are you going curveball or something? But it's there's just getting more established pitches is going to be the next step I want to see from him.
The last prospect I want to talk about is Pico Cohen. Was very impressive, very exciting. Two-thirds of innings, strikes out both of the batters that he faced this spring. That was my first time actually getting eyes on him, and I was very impressed.
Yeah, I saw him briefly in a I guess his pro debut of sorts, but not really because it didn't count because it was a live BP. But um, I was, and it was funny because there was probably like a dozen reporters there, and I was like jumping for joy and running all over the place trying to get photos and stuff of him, and they're like, "Who the heck is Pico? And why is his name Pico if he's like 6'5"?" But yeah, I'm really excited to see what he does this year. I'm guessing he's gonna start in Tampa. Would I don't know because it's funny with the way that they work pitchers because some of them start in Tampa and some of them start in the complex league. But I would imagine he's a Tampa kid if he's been pitching already in spring training games.
Yeah, that was gonna be my guess too, because I think Hudson Valley is full right now, especially with guys coming off of the IL.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to do this. I'm gonna have to make a list of my projection rotations again. That's what I gotta do. But I know I think he'll be in Hudson Valley, to be honest.
Mm.
First pitcher picked in, collegiate experience. So I
So,
expect
so,
them to
so
be
off the top of the
aggressive
head,
with
off the
him.
top, what's your Hudson Valley rotation gonna look like on opening day?
Off the top of my head, let me. God, that's so hard. I can't do it off the top of my head. Um, because I'm trying. Oh, obviously Kyle Carr's moved. I expect Rivas to start there. Kate Smith will probably start there. Just coming back from injury. I think he'll be in
He's
that
phenomenal
rotation.
in the Arizona Fall League.
Huh?
Kate Smith was
Huh?
phenomenal in the Arizona Fall League.
Yeah. I think Cunningham will start in Double A. If healthy. The question is Siebert going to be a starter or not? If he is, I think he would stay in Hudson Valley. Cohen
I
obviously I
would
think will
not be
be.
surprised if Siebert is in the rotation to start.
Yeah, it's kind of what you would expect them to do is, they're not shy about trying anyone and any, and try. I can't speak right now. They're not shy about trying anyone in the rotation if they think they've got good stuff, and obviously they like his stuff. And then I'm trying to think of who finished the season in Tampa, but I think I would
I
want
think
Louis
Lalane
Serna
Landry,
there, but I don't think
starts.
he will
Andrew
be. Huh?
Landry.
Landry will be there. So I mean that's five though. Landry, Cone, Siebert,
I
Smith,
I have
and
to assume Lalani's going to start there as well.
I was gonna say that because he's been in Tampa for too
Two
long,
seasons,
including
yeah,
that injury time.
yeah.
I don't know. It's I would not be against keeping him in Tampa, just like kind of what we were saying. He's finally healthy. He's probably gonna be starting a season in April. Let's just ease him into it and let him. You know, I don't want to throw him in to tougher competition while he's still getting adjusted, just because of his lengthy injury history and amount of time he spent off the mound.
I would almost think that if they're gonna have Siebert become a starter from the little relief pitching that he was doing last year, have him go to Tampa, like you were saying, with you're gonna have less impact on competition. Put Lalane into that role that Siebert would have had into that rotation, and then you kind of see how it goes because you can always move these kids up and down, right? I mean, we've seen this all the time. Like, um, who was someone who went from Tampa to Double A last year, and it was for one start, and then they came back. Was it like Rivas or something? I think
That
wasn't it?
happened. Andrew Landry.
Andrew Landry, yeah, yeah. So they move these kids all over the place just to try things out and see what happens. And I wouldn't be surprised if they had Siebert start down here. I mean, he's a Tampa kid for one, so he's close to home, and
But
that'll be a little bit better, I think,
he's
too.
already pitched at Hudson Valley.
Yeah,
No, I
it's
understand that, but
it's
as a reliever,
Mm.
yeah, but it's
I don't see them sending him
you
back.
got to remember
His stuff looked
they've
good.
shown
It was a
aggressiveness.
small sample size, but he looked good at Hudson Valley.
And they've shown aggressiveness. Obviously Chase Hampton was a sixth round pick that they threw immediately into into high A. Will Warren was an eighth round pick they threw into high A. I think they've shown they're not gun shy. If we like your stuff, we're gonna put you at an advanced level. And obviously Siebert's he was older even for a draft. Like he's 24 years old already. He's not a young chicken. Like so like I think if they do want to make him a starter, they will put him in Hudson Valley regardless. But it is an interesting, like, I do see where you're coming from, Brophy, that like, yeah, maybe since this is his first time starting, um, fully since 2024, yeah, maybe they do put him in Tampa for a month or two just to get his feet wet with being back in the rotation.
Maybe an extended spring training for some of these guys because don't forget about that because stuff doesn't count with the stats for extended spring training, which is why they're going to eventually go to that in the next couple of years.
Before I move on, have you seen any of the guys that are injured that are coming back off of injury yet, like Mac Estrada?
I've just seen photos. Like I was looking at the Hudson Valley media guide today. So they all have photos, meaning they're all down here. I haven't physically seen any of them around,
Mm.
and they haven't been on any of the supplemental minor league rosters.
Um, One last question that I had is something that I've just been pondering for a while now is that are we seeing the next core developing, right? You had Louis Heel, Will Warren, Ben Rice, Cam Schlittler, Jason is up now in the pipeline coming along is Laronge, Elmer, and Ben Hess, George Lombard as well. Could we be looking at the next core, the next quote unquote core four, or in this case, core four plus?
I mean,
I think so.
I definitely think with the rotation, we're approaching that point where, Cole and Rodon each have 3 more years under contract. By the time that's done, Schlittler will, I guess, we don't know where things will be with the CBA and how long player control will be, but it's just assuming it stays under current, player control rules, Schlittler will still have a couple years of arbitration left. Hess, Elmer, and Carlos will probably have just reached arbitration by that point. If it's 3 year, no, not even because they aren't going to start the season right now, so they'll probably still have, yeah, they'll probably just be entering arbitration in their final year of pre-arb. So like that's four controllable young arms who could be really good and be the faces of the rotation with Max Fried. And that's not even to mention Will Warren, who can still be really solid and has looked good this spring. We talked about the Yankees, maybe not being as aggressive spending. Well, guess what? If your rotation is able to be homegrown like that,
Yeah.
it allows you to go out and be more aggressive. And maybe, they want to bring in a Paul Skeens. I don't know. Maybe they need to get a Gunnar Henderson to be the next face of the franchise. Those having those guys be the staple rotation will really help. So I think we're seeing that from the pitching side. The hitting side, well, I guess I think Kilby and Lombard could be, if that's your middle infield. That's quite a core of two young guys to have. And if you take those two and two of those pitchers, I guess you kind of are looking at a little bit of a core four right there. I think it's definitely possible, but it's hard to get too high into that because when you look at the last core, I mean, Aaron Judge is obviously the best player in the world and a future Hall of Famer, best hitter in the world. Um, but I guess the rest of that has kind of flaked out. But then the previous core, you're looking at Derek Jeter, who's a Hall of Famer, Bernie Williams, who could arguably be one, Jorge
Could be
Posada.
one.
It's Andy Pettit, who's a borderline, that's four borderline Hall of Famers. Um, I don't like to put that pressure, but I definitely think the rotation could be a strength, an affordable strength, and that Dax and George, could be a really strong middle infield. But I don't want to put the strength in them being the guy. I don't want to put the pressure of them being the guys to lead the team to their next World Series, beyond Judge.
I mean, and especially if the Yankees are able to continuously pump out pitchers the way they have been doing.
Hmm.
I mean, that's just been crazy the way that it's like they lose a pitcher or trade a pitcher, and then within a year you hear about the next guy.
Yeah, and that's where the strength is right now. It's in the pitching. There's not. I mean, you don't really have people talking about Core Jackson or like I'm the only one really talking about Bryce Martin, Woodzalonic, and you know, everybody's talking about Dax Kilby because he's the first rounder,
Right.
but there's not there's not a lot of people talking. Like even when Ben Rice was in the system, nobody expected him to be like when he was in low A, high A. They didn't expect him to be this kind of a caliber of a player. But that kind of goes to the kudos that Damon Oppenheimer and his crew have done on the amateur scouting side, because they can find these incredible talent. You know, who would have ever thought to go to Noonan, Georgia, to find a kid named Dex Kilby? Like that's really incredible stuff. Instead of just going to Vanderbilt and out west, and all the SEC schools and that they typically go to find talent like what they found with Kilby, and to find there's a lot of talent with Caden Kent, and again with Grizzell, because you have that lineage just like you have with Lombard. So I'm excited for what we're going to see. I don't know if we have necessarily a core four kind of a setup coming, um, especially since we don't really have good catching depth like we used to before all that the trade stuff has happened.
It's something I just, was thinking about when you were speaking is, it's hard to see the Yankees fully doing this just because, as the team is always competing, you don't want to trade away guys who are productive to that team. But, if they get into a position where they do have surplus starters when they have a guy coming up, I think we saw from this trade deadline and offseason that MLB pitchers are super desirable and expensive. And, if Will Warren has a solid year, but you have Ben Hess, Bryce Cunningham, Legrand, and Elmer all banging on the door for a full-time spot. What could you spin out for Will Warren in terms of, prospects, and then also trying to and then use that to get, maybe next year, maybe they don't want to re-sign Jazz, so you need a new second baseman, or, um, what other, maybe, we don't see the improvements from McMahon and you need to get a third baseman. If you can, get those surplus goods from a good pitcher and then use those to get the other position players you need, because obviously that's where the Yankees farm is weak. That'd be such a luxury to start seeing and spinning out. So I guess that's more of something to follow along for 2027 off season. But if you are able to get guys looks in the pros, it allows you to trade some guys you currently have, for surplus for, great prices, just 'cause that's what the market dictates right now.
Um, on the final note before we move up, we head out of here. The breakout game is this Saturday. Who are you guys expecting to be the starting pitcher? Typically, the Yankees have gone with someone completely out of left field. Last year was Laronge. The year before that was Brock. What do you guys think?
Well, I think one thing with that is, you say completely that out of left field. Obviously, the Yankees had a lot more information than we did at the time, but Legrand, they clearly were impressed with, and that's why it started with Hudson Valley, and it became clear why. So I think it's out of left field is more of just who has been the most impressive to them, and maybe they don't give it to Legrand again because he got it last year, but I think Elmer
Or he made the team?
it is a clear guy who could be in favor to start that. And then I think Ben Hess is another guy who's, shown out, and that's, in favor to start that. I don't expect, something too out of left field when you have three guys who are all in that top 110 range, giving Hess a little support, because I know that he's not all in many top 100s, but he's, a name that's in consideration.
If I had to pick out of left field, I'm gonna say Alan Facundo, or maybe like a Xavier Rivas, kind of a 1-2. I don't know which would be one, which would be two, but something tells you they're gonna put Alan Facundo out there.
Yeah, I could see Facundo.
Who are you guys excited to watch from like who on the roster are you excited to see in the game though, besides who's starting?
I need to see more of Core Jackson and Caden Kent because Core only had the one AB so far this spring. Um, Caden looks good on on defense, and that's really all I've seen him because I think he's only had two or three ABs, so I can't really tell much from that. You can only tell so much from one or two at bats. So I'm excited to see what he does. I'd like to see some Jackson Lovich. Um, Dexter's Peralta is probably the curious ad out of the whole roster. So I'm wondering if they see something that I don't know about because he did not look good last year in the complex league. Like there was a lot of swing and miss with him. I mean, the talent is there. Like you could tell there's something really raw that's there, but I would say what out of that whole roster for maybe hitters, I want to see some of Dexter's Peralta.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm excited to see pitcher wise, the two of the college 2025 picks that we haven't seen yet in Mac Hewer and Roy Fox. Mac has been a guy who has gotten a lot of love from media outlets, being a former eighth rounder. So, getting to see him pitch and get some data on him would be very exciting. And then Roy Fox, just, the tape I watched at Notre Dame, he just looks a really steady pitcher. So yeah, just seeing both those guys on the mound. And then Thatcher Hurd, just because, he's a guy I loved at at UCLA and then LSU. But he missed last year with Tommy John surgery. So finally getting him on the mound, he has some loud stuff. And it'll be cool to, get to watch him pitch a little bit. And then from a position player side, I think you kind of hit it with Peralta. Dexter's Peralta. It was interesting seeing him just because he did have such a rough season. But I think I've made it pretty clear on this show that I'm a huge Emmanuel Tejeda fan. Looking at the roster, obviously, a Caden Kent or a Core Jackson could play third base. But Emmanuel is the only true third baseman on that of the nine infielders on that roster, so he could be the starting third baseman. I would love to see him get two or three plate appearances, just because I'm a really big, like I've said, I think he's kind of a minor version of Dax Kilby, where he just the tools aren't as loud as Dax, but he has a lot of those same traits that could make him a good player. So I would love to see him get an extended look in this game.
Yeah, for me, I'm guessing it's going to be one of the guys that probably is coming off of IL to start this game, or it could even be a Mac here was a guy that I'm excited to see. And my guy that I've said it before in terms of a breakout candidate is Brandon Maia, and I'm hoping we could see him, show out during this game. I mean, he has
You're saying
looked
like
good.
a
He has looked good from the film that I've seen of him the past couple of weeks, and even in off season.
you're saying like a Louis Serna kind of a thing, right? Because he's coming off of what Tommy John or
I
I
mean,
think
with
it was something like Tommy John.
Luis Serna, isn't he like 35 now? I mean, with Serna, I know he's been in the org. I want to say since he was 16, so he's been in the league for like maybe
Yeah,
4 or 5 years now. I know he has very good stuff. The changeup is nasty, but I mean, he still hasn't got past Tampa, and that's mostly because of health. So,
yeah.
I mean,
But and
hopefully this is the year that the health doesn't betray him.
that's like Maea, where he's been in the org for a couple of years as well, and he hasn't gotten into even full season ball in Tampa.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping this is, like you said, I'm hoping this is his breakout year because there's all the stuff that I've seen of him, in person. There's been a lot to like. A lot of the mechanics are 100% sound. He's a better outfielder than I would say even Jason is right now.
Well, yeah, there's no doubt about that. Even as I'm the biggest Jason Dominguez fan in the world, there's no doubt
Yeah,
that Brandon May has just he's instinctive, naturally instinctive, the much better center fielder, much better outfielder. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, he's an awesome athlete. It's just about staying healthy.
Hmm.
That's, like obviously we can dig into some of the batted ball metrics and whether he's on the ground too much or whatnot, eventually. But I want to be doing that because he's played 100 games this year.
Yeah.
That's just what I hope to see.
yeah.
Hmm. All right. Unless you guys have anything else, we're gonna head out here. Anything else? Last words.
Yeah,
All
we gotta
right.
watch we're recording this right before the finals for the World Baseball Classic start. So go USA.
Jesus Christ.
Go Venezuela.
Oh my God. That was awesome, by the way. I hope that we're able to keep on the 3-year schedule for the WBC. I've been seeing stuff about a fourth
I
year
think
in
it's 2030
2030.
right now because the Olympics is in 2 years. But if
Yeah.
MLB players get to go to the Olympics, it's kind of what the NHL is doing right now. We have the Olympics this year. In 2 years, they're doing a World Cup. So, if that's what it becomes, is if they give the okay for players to go to the Olympics, then, 2 years Olympics, 2 years World Baseball Classic. I'm cool with that.
I'm good
And I
with
would
more World
imagine
Baseball Classics.
I would imagine they do like what hockey does, where there's no All-Star game this year because they went to the Olympics. So because
Yep.
it's going to be held around All-Star time, instead of an All-Star break, you have an Olympic break.
Yeah, start the season a week earlier, start it this week would basically be almost the start of the season. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Still 2 years for them to decide that. Let's make sure there's still baseball going on.
Yeah.
All right. All right, guys, gonna head out. Thank you all for coming on. Appreciate you. On the way out, make sure you hit that like button. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe. Good night, guys.